Imagine standing in the Ice Age tundra, stomach gnawing with hunger, no supermarkets, no warm kitchen, not even a spark of fire to cook with. Every bite meant the difference between life and death, and what our prehistoric ancestors ate to survive might shock you. Forget the picture of hunters feasting on giant steaks. The real menu was far more desperate, raw, and sometimes downright disgusting. The question is, could you eat what they did if your survival depended on it? Picture this. The icy wind cuts through animal hides wrapped around your shoulders. Your stomach growls, not because you skipped breakfast, but because you haven't eaten in 2 days. Suddenly, your hunting party drags back the massive body of a reindeer. Relief floods the group, but there's no fire to roast it over, no sizzling fat or smoky warmth. Instead, survival means one thing: eating it raw. For Ice Age humans, raw meat wasn't a rare fallback, it was the foundation of survival. Fresh kills offered immediate calories, but chewing through raw muscle was no easy feat. The flesh was dense, sinewy, and often frozen solid. Imagine biting into icy slabs of meat so tough they could crack your teeth. That was dinner. Welcome to Before Flame. Fire. If you enjoyed traveling back in time with me, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you never miss the next journey into our ancient past. To make it manageable, they had methods. Sharp stone flakes sliced meat into thin strips, reducing the effort needed to tear through it. Sometimes they pounded it against rocks to soften the fibers, almost like a prehistoric form of tenderizing. It wasn't glamorous, but every shred mattered. Protein from these cuts gave strength, but it wasn't just about muscles. Without carbs or warmth from cooked meals, these raw strips kept their bodies fueled for long hunts across endless tundras. The act of eating wasn't just nourishment, it was a fight to extract life from something unyielding. And yet, even in this brutal reality, there was a kind of rhythm. The kill brought energy, the group gathered close, and for a moment, survival didn't feel impossible. But raw meat was only the beginning of their strategy. The real prize wasn't flesh at all. If raw meat was the foundation of survival, fat was the true treasure of the Ice Age. In fact, for prehistoric humans, fat was worth more than muscle. Why? Because fat meant warmth, not from the outside like fire, but from the inside out. Every calorie of fat was a spark of heat, a defense against frostbite and exhaustion. Imagine a hunter cracking open the leg bone of a mammoth or bison. Inside wasn't blood or flesh, but marrow, rich, fatty, and calorie-dense. They would scoop it out with bone tools or simply suck it straight from the cavity. This marrow was like survival gold, packed with energy that lean muscle could never provide. Without it, they couldn't endure the endless cold. Organs were another vital piece of the puzzle. The liver, heart, and kidneys weren't just edible, they were nutrient powerhouses. Iron, vitamins, and minerals, all of which were desperately needed in a land where plants were scarce, came from these internal parts. Archaeological evidence even suggests they were eaten first, before muscle meat, because they spoiled quicker and provided instant energy. And then there was blood. For many tribes, it wasn't waste, it was food. Fresh blood could be consumed immediately after a kill, offering hydration and minerals. In an environment where clean liquid water was often frozen solid, blood became a shocking but effective substitute. What's striking is that nothing went to waste. Every organ, every drop of fat, every ounce of marrow was used. The animal wasn't just prey, it was a complete survival kit. But even this resourcefulness wasn't enough on its own. Survival also meant thinking ahead, storing food in ways we'd never expect. Killing a mammoth or bison was a triumph, but it also created a huge problem. How do you keep hundreds of pounds of raw meat from rotting, especially without fire? For Ice Age humans, preservation wasn't optional, it was survival. Nature itself became their freezer. In sub-zero temperatures, fresh meat could be laid out on ice or buried under snow, keeping it edible for weeks or even months. The frozen tundra was like a natural refrigerator, saving them from starvation during leaner times. Hunters didn't always eat their kill immediately. They stored slabs of meat in icy pits or crevices, returning when food was scarce. But cold wasn't the only trick. Evidence suggests that in some regions, humans experimented with drying thin strips of meat in the wind. Without heat, the process was slower, but even partial dehydration made food last longer. Some groups also smeared fat over exposed meat, creating a protective barrier against decay. Salt, when available, was another hidden ally. Natural salt deposits allowed prehistoric people to rub crystals onto meat, slowing spoilage. While rare, this technique shows how inventive humans could be with the limited resources at hand. Even organs and marrow were stored. Bones filled with fatty marrow could be sealed with hide or snow, keeping them fresh for later. Fat itself might be packed tightly in animal stomachs, turning them into primitive containers. What's remarkable is the mindset behind all this. These people didn't just live day to day. They planned ahead, anticipating hunger before it struck. In a world without fire, food wasn't just eaten, it was managed like treasure. And with that, survival wasn't just about eating raw, it became about enduring hunger's shadow day after day. When we picture the Ice Age, it's easy to imagine endless snow with no plants in sight. But even in the harshest climates, vegetation played a quiet role in human survival. Though plants were scarce, prehistoric people learned to spot and use whatever nature provided: roots, berries, and hardy greens. Edible roots were especially valuable. Beneath the frozen soil, some plants grew tubers that stored energy underground. These roots were tough, fibrous, and bitter when raw, but they were a source of carbohydrates that gave a much-needed balance to a meat-heavy diet. To chew them, people sometimes pounded or shredded them with stone tools to soften the fibers. Berries and seasonal fruits were another lifeline. During brief summer months, tribes collected wild berries rich in sugar and vitamins. Unlike meat, berries spoiled quickly, so they were eaten on the spot or mashed into pastes. These bursts of sweetness weren't just food, they were morale boosters in an otherwise grim diet. Nuts and seeds, though rare in icy tundras, were prized when found. Their oils provided energy, and their shells offered natural protection for storage. Crushing them into pastes with stones made them easier to digest, creating a primitive but nutrient-packed survival food. Of course, this wasn't easy or abundant. Foraging meant long treks, trial and error, and the constant risk of eating something poisonous. Unlike us, they had no guidebooks. Knowledge was passed down by elders who had learned through experience, and sometimes tragedy. Plants didn't dominate their diet, but they offered variety, vitamins, and a small safety net when hunting failed. But plants weren't the only fallback. When the land was barren, Ice Age humans turned to an even more surprising food source: insects and the small creatures that lived beneath the snow. When we think about prehistoric diets, giant mammoths and bison come to mind. But the truth is, survival often depended on the tiniest, least glamorous sources of nutrition: insects and grubs. Creeping beneath logs, wriggling inside rotting wood, or buried in the soil, these little creatures offered what Ice Age humans desperately needed: protein and fat. Grubs, for example, were calorie-dense and easy to find, especially in warmer seasons. People likely dug them out with simple tools or bare hands, eating them raw or mashing them into pastes. Beetles, ants, grasshoppers, and larvae were also on the menu. Crunchy, squirming, and often unpleasant to eat raw, they nonetheless provided survival calories when big game wasn't an option. In fact, many modern indigenous cultures still use insects as staple foods, suggesting this practice stretches deep into human history. It wasn't just insects. Small creatures like frogs, lizards, and even rodents were vital backup meals. Trapping or catching them required less energy than hunting mammoths, and in times of scarcity, a handful of mice or a cluster of frogs could mean the difference between hunger and survival. Bones and skins were stripped clean with stone tools, leaving nothing to waste. What makes this fascinating is the mindset. For Ice Age humans, food wasn't about preference, it was about endurance. While eating a handful of raw grubs might repulse us today, for them it was simply survival math: small, reliable, and packed with energy. But the Ice Age diet had another surprising side. Beyond plants and insects, humans even turned to Earth itself: clays and minerals that may have been eaten not for calories, but for protection. When survival pushes humans to the edge, food stops being about taste. It becomes about what the body desperately needs. And sometimes, that meant eating what most of us wouldn't even call food: earth, clay, and minerals. Across cultures, both ancient and modern, there's evidence of geophagy, the eating of soil or clay. Why would Ice Age humans do this? Not for calories, but for minerals and medicine. Clay could absorb toxins from raw plants or meat, helping the stomach process foods that might otherwise make them sick. It also offered trace minerals like iron and calcium, vital in a diet often dominated by meat and fat. Picture a hungry tribe finding a clay deposit near a riverbank. Children might scoop up handfuls of the soft earth, while adults shaped it into small lumps. These weren't meals in the usual sense, but survival supplements. Some anthropologists suggest this practice may have been especially common during seasons when fresh plants were unavailable. Beyond clay, humans may have consumed charcoal left from natural wildfires, again, not for energy, but for detoxification. Even salty earth deposits or mineral-rich water sources became part of their survival diet, giving their bodies the balance needed to withstand harsh conditions. This might sound extreme, but it shows something remarkable. Prehistoric humans didn't just eat what looked appetizing, they experimented. They learned through trial and error what their bodies could handle, and over time, that knowledge became tradition, passed down through generations. Insects, plants, minerals. These weren't the glamorous parts of Ice Age survival, but they highlight a truth. When the world offered little, humans found a way to make use of everything. And yet, survival wasn't just about food. It was also about mindset, resilience, and the strength to keep going in a world that never relented. In the Ice Age, no one survived alone. A single hunter, no matter how strong, could not endure endless cold, roaming predators, and scarce food. What kept humans alive wasn't just muscle or tools, it was community. Imagine a small band of people huddled together in a shelter made of hides and bones. The wind outside screamed like a living thing, but inside, survival depended on cooperation. Food was shared, not hoarded. A hunter might risk his life for the group, knowing the next day someone else would do the same for him. Children weren't raised by just their parents, but by the entire tribe. Elders, though too weak to hunt, passed down knowledge: where to find roots, how to track animals, which plants to avoid. This web of shared responsibility created a safety net that no individual could build alone. Even hunting itself was communal. Bringing down a mammoth or bison required coordination, planning, and courage. Spears were thrown in unison, traps were set together, and when the beast finally fell, every part of it was divided so all could eat. No single family could hoard such a kill. Unity ensured survival. But community wasn't only about survival. It was about emotional strength. In a world without firelight to push back the dark, humans leaned on each other for comfort, stories, and identity. Around these gatherings, trust was forged, the invisible fire that burned even when real flames were absent. This sense of we over me wasn't just a strategy, it was the greatest survival tool our ancestors had. And it's a reminder, resilience often starts not with the individual, but with the group. One of the greatest lessons from the Ice Age is that survival didn't come from resisting nature, but from adapting to it. The environment was constantly shifting. Glaciers advanced and retreated, herds of animals migrated, and seasons swung between brutal cold and brief, fragile summers. To survive, prehistoric humans had to bend with these changes, not break under them. If food in one region ran dry, they didn't stay and starve. They moved. Entire groups migrated across vast landscapes, following herds of mammoths, reindeer, and bison. Mobility was their lifeline, and shelters were designed to be portable. Hides that could be packed, bone structures that could be left behind. When hunting strategies failed, they experimented. If large prey was too dangerous, they shifted focus to smaller animals, birds, or fish. If spears didn't work, they refined their tools with sharper stone tips or adjusted their tactics to hunt in groups rather than alone. Even clothing was an example of adaptability. Instead of relying on one type of hide, they layered furs for different conditions, lighter ones in summer, heavier pelts in winter. Each adjustment was a response to nature's challenge, proving that humans weren't just reacting, they were innovating. This flexibility is what set them apart from other animals. Where many species died out during the Ice Age, humans survived because they didn't cling to one way of life. They observed, adapted, and tried again. It's a lesson that echoes today. Resilience isn't about brute force, it's about flexibility. The ability to shift, to adjust, to accept the environment and still find a way forward. That's what made humans unstoppable in the face of the Ice Age. Survival in the Ice Age wasn't just a physical struggle, it was a mental one. Imagine waking up every morning with no guarantee of food, warmth, or safety. The sheer uncertainty could crush the human spirit. And yet, our ancestors endured. What carried them wasn't only their bodies, it was their mindset. Resilience began with meaning. Even in the harshest conditions, humans found ways to create culture. Cave paintings, carved figurines, and symbolic markings have been uncovered across Ice Age sites. At first glance, these might look like art, but they were more than decoration. They were reminders of identity, of belonging, of purpose. When the world outside was brutal, stories painted on cave walls brought people together and gave them something bigger than survival alone. Hope was another lifeline. Believing that tomorrow could be better was just as important as the calories from a meal. Without hope, every setback, a failed hunt, a freezing night, a predator attack, could have broken them. With it, they pressed forward. Even rituals likely played a role. From burial practices to symbolic carvings, these actions gave structure to chaos. They reminded people that their struggle wasn't meaningless, that their lives connected to something greater. This mental resilience was their invisible armor. Muscles could fail, tools could break, shelters could collapse, but as long as the will to endure remained, humans had a chance. And that mindset, the belief in survival, in community, in meaning, is the very reason we're here today. It wasn't just raw meat or mammoth hides that kept them alive. It was the human spirit, refusing to give up, even in a fireless world of ice. For tens of thousands of years, prehistoric humans survived in ways that seem unthinkable to us today. They ate what the land provided: raw meat, marrow, insects, roots, and whatever else kept them alive. They built shelters from bones and hides, braved predators in the dark, and endured without the comfort of fire or modern tools. Their world was unforgiving, but it shaped resilience, adaptability, and unity that became the foundation of who we are. Today, we live in comfort they could never have imagined. Our food is processed, packaged, and delivered with ease. Our homes are heated at the push of a button. And yet, in all this convenience, we risk forgetting the strength written into our very DNA, the survival instincts that once defined us. The lesson our ancestors left us isn't just about how they lived, but about what it means to endure. Resilience isn't born in comfort, it's born in struggle. And while we may never face the same challenges they did, we can still learn from their spirit, to adapt, to unite, and to endure when life tests us. So the next time you sit down to a warm meal, remember the people who once gnawed marrow from bones in the freezing dark. And ask yourself, backhand index pointing right, if you had to live as they did, stripped of fire, technology, and comfort, how long would you survive?